All right, here is where things stand right now. As of July 1st, 2026, three stories are being reported in parallel out of Iran. A cyber attack targeting Iranian financial and government systems, reporting on an increased rate of executions inside the country, and a public disagreement over whether ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz will be charged what Tehran is describing as a service fee. The common assumption is that these are three separate stories. The contrarian read, the one worth working through carefully, is that they connect, and that at least one of them ends up on your side of the ocean, in the form of fuel prices and shipping costs. Before we go through it, if this kind of skeptical source-by-source examination is useful, hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so the next update lands in your feed. Two comment questions for today. First, would you support the U.S. reimposing the sanctions the reporting describes as recently waived if Tehran continues to charge for Strait of Hormuz transits? Second, when official statements from Washington and Tehran openly contradict each other, whose default position do you trust, and why? Drop your take in the comments below. Story 1 on the assumption list, the cyber attack. Reporting attributed to open-source intelligence coverage of Iran describes Iranian banks under severe cyber attacks, with financial and government institutions cited as affected. The reporting is careful, no party has publicly claimed responsibility. The reporting notes historical precedent for cyber operations against Iranian systems by unnamed actors, but does not assert who is behind this specific incident. That distinction matters. A cyber attack without a public claim of responsibility is a data point about Iran's exposure. It is not, on its own, proof of an author. Anyone naming a specific service today is filling in a blank. Story 2 on the assumption list, executions. Reporting cited in the source material, attributed to the Wall Street Journal, describes Iran reportedly increasing the rate of hangings, referencing the wider crackdown on protests the reporting describes as previously covered. I want to be direct here. This is a serious claim about state conduct, and it is a claim we are relaying, not one we are independently verifying in this video. The framing in the reporting is that the pace of executions is described as rising. That framing should be treated as attributed reporting, not as an independently confirmed count. Story 3 on the assumption list, the Strait of Hormuz, and this is where the proximity hook sits. Reporting quotes an official statement from the Foreign Ministry of Oman, describing an agreement with Iran to maintain dialogue on the future administration of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz, on the services that will be provided, and on the costs associated with them, in accordance with what the statement characterizes as international standards. The reporting further describes the two coastal states, Oman and Iran, as central to any arrangement. Tehran, per the source material, is presenting this cost as a service fee, not a toll. Words matter, but so does substance. If ships pay to transit the strait, the cost eventually flows into shipping rates. Shipping rates flow into refined product prices. Refined product prices flow into what you pay at the pump. That is the proximity of this story to your household budget. Now, the contrarian reality check part. The reporting describes President Donald Trump publicly stating that he has, quote, agreed to allow the Hormuz Strait to remain open with no further naval blockade, adding that all ships are remaining in place should it be necessary to reinstate the blockade, which the statement describes as, quote, at this point highly unlikely. The reporting also cites the U.S. Treasury releasing money and/or sanctions relief into an escrow controlled by the United States to be used for the purchase of food and medical supplies exclusively from the United States. That is the U.S. framing. Set that next to the Omani statement, which, again per the reporting, describes a working group with Iran on cost of services in the Strait. Those two positions do not reconcile on their own. The U.S. is publicly describing a fully open strait. The Omani-Iranian statement is describing a joint working group on the cost of transit. That is a contradiction sitting in public. And the point of a reality check is to sit with the contradiction rather than to smooth over it. Stay with me because the next layer is where it gets sharper. Reporting cites Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announcing that the United States has issued a sanctions waiver to Iran, described in the reporting as allowing Iran to sell its oil freely, with buyers referenced in the reporting including China, Pakistan, and India. In the same batch of reporting, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghai openly contradicts U.S. statements about IAEA inspectors entering nuclear sites damaged during the war. The reporting attributes to Baghai the statement that Iran has no plans to allow IAEA inspectors to enter those nuclear sites. Now step back and read those pieces together. On one side, Iran has been described in the reporting as receiving a broad sanctions waiver and as agreeing, per the U.S. framing, to a denuclearization understanding. On the other side, Iran itself is publicly stating it will not allow IAEA inspectors into damaged nuclear sites, while, per the Omani statement, moving to formalize a cost structure for Strait of Hormuz transit. The contrarian reading is not that any single party is lying. It is that the two governments are describing the same arrangement in incompatible language. Both public positions cannot be simultaneously accurate. The reporting adds two other pieces that go directly to proximity. First, reporting notes multiple U.S. Air Force refueling tankers airborne near the Strait of Hormuz, and cites the return of U.S. Air Force refueling aircraft to Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar over recent days. Second, reporting cites U.S. Deputy Secretary of Defense Steve Feinberg informing congressional appropriators that the Pentagon will require approximately $80 billion in supplemental funding to cover the cost of the Iran war, with the reporting adding that the president is described as expected to meet with defense contractors to urge them to accelerate production of depleted missile stockpiles. That figure, $80 billion, is a supplemental request figure as characterized in the reporting. It is not a final appropriation, but it lands directly in the domestic budget conversation, and that is again the proximity story. There is one more thread the reporting brings into this: ballistic missiles. Reporting cites Pakistan, described in the source material as leading part of the negotiation, saying that the Memorandum of Understanding does not cover Iran's ballistic missiles, and citing that Iran is estimated in the reporting to retain roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of its long-range ballistic missile stockpile. That is a description of the arms picture as characterized in the reporting. It is not an authoritative U.S. or Israeli statement of Iran's inventory. Treat it as attributed reporting. So what is the contrarian reality check when you put these threads together? It is that the assumption that this is over, that the ceasefire holds, the strait is open, the sanctions are managed, and the missile question is resolved, is not what the public statements themselves are saying. The statements are describing an unstable equilibrium. And unstable equilibria produce visible consequences downstream, in oil, in shipping insurance, in defense supplementals, and in the tempo of U.S. deployments in the Gulf. I want to name what we do not know. We do not know the author of the cyber attack on Iranian financial and government systems. We do not know the current independently verified rate of executions inside Iran. We do not know the final cost, if any, that ships will pay under the arrangement described in the Omani statement. And we do not know whether the Doha or Switzerland tracks will produce a durable framework or fall apart. We do not know that for certain yet. So to recap for July 1st, 2026, a cyber attack is reported against Iranian banks, financial, and government institutions with no publicly claimed responsibility. Reporting attributed to the Wall Street Journal describes an increased rate of executions inside Iran. An official statement from the Foreign Ministry of Oman describes a joint working group with Iran on the future administration of the Strait of Hormuz and the cost of transit services. President Trump publicly describes the strait as open, with no blockade in place. The U.S. Treasury is described in the reporting as releasing funds into escrow and issuing a sanctions waiver. Iran publicly rejects allowing IAEA inspectors into damaged nuclear sites. U.S. refueling tankers are reported returning to Al Udeid, and Pentagon supplemental needs are cited at approximately $80 billion. Here is what I am watching next. First, whether the U.S. publicly acknowledges any transit fee arrangement or continues to describe the strait as fully open. Second, whether IAEA access becomes a binding condition of any further sanctions relief. Third, whether the reported cyber campaign draws a public Iranian response. Fourth, how Congress moves on the reported supplemental request. I am laying out what we know, what we do not know, and you can judge the rest. If you want the next update the moment developments move, hit like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. Which of these three threads do you think ends up mattering most to households outside the region? The cyber front, the transit fee, or the supplemental? Tell me below. Stay sharp, and I will see you on the next one.